Thank you for listening to my daddy's podcast.
Hey, what's going on, sports fans? My name is Timothy J. Jones, and welcome to another edition of the Gumbo Pot Sports Podcast. It's where we talk about some of the hottest topics in all of sports. Before we get started, I ask that you hit the like and subscribe button. If you're new to the channel, I always say, hopefully by the end of this episode, you will have hit the subscribe button. But I just ask that you hit the like button anyway, all right? On this edition, we're going to be continuing our talk, 32 teams in 32 days. We're breaking down all 32 NFL teams. We've done a lot of episodes so far, so if you're new to the channel, you can go back into the archives and check out some of the previous episodes we've done so far. But let's go ahead and get into it. We have been focusing the last few episodes on the NFC South. We've already done 2 NFC South teams so far. We've talked about the Atlanta Falcons, and we talked about the Carolina Panthers. And now we switch gears to a team that is still trying to figure it out post Sean Payton and Drew Brees. I'm referring to the New Orleans Saints. Now, the New Orleans Saints in 2023, they took some strides forward. They still finished 9-8 and missing the playoffs for the 3rd consecutive year. But they were able to do some positive things that they can actually build on. They won 4 out of their last 5 games. And you also have a new offensive coordinator in Klint Kubiak coming in, bringing in a different offense to be able to help some of these playmakers be able to make plays. Last season, it was pretty much a writing on the wall. The New Orleans Saints had to turn the page from their old offensive philosophies. For years, it was the Drew Brees and Sean Payton show. And even when Sean Payton stepped down at the end of the 2021 season, the Saints were still trying to do some of the things that Sean Payton did as the head coach. We know that Sean Payton called the plays for the New Orleans Saints, and, you know, they tried to keep his West Coast style alive. But, of course, just like anything in life, sometimes you got to turn a page. It was a great thing when it happened, but, you know, innovation happens and you got to adapt with the times. So it seems like the New Orleans Saints are trying to do just that. But let's go ahead and get into it. I got the depth chart of the New Orleans Saints right here, and we'll start with quarterback Derek Carr. Now, Derek Carr came to the New Orleans Saints in the 2023 season. He was a longtime franchise quarterback of the Las Vegas Raiders. They decided to move on from him, and the New Orleans Saints end up signing him. And Derek Carr comes to the New Orleans Saints with a lot on his resume. He's a guy that's been in the league for a long time. He's a quarterback that a lot of people feel that in the right situation, maybe he'll be able to hit it out of the park. They look at him as more as a quarterback that has been a victim of an organization versus him actually not being good enough to lead a team anywhere. And, you know, Derek Carr in 2023 with the New Orleans Saints had an up and down season. I mean, there were some games where, you know, he played respectable, but there were other games that left you scratching your head. And it was such a mixed bag. You know, a lot of people look at Derek Carr and they look at some of the things that happened to him last season. You know, he was knocked out of a few games. You know, he wasn't really healthy, so maybe that played a role. But, you know, the Saints need more out of Derek Carr if they're going to be successful in 2024. You pay this guy because you feel like he is the answer. The Saints have been looking for the successor to Drew Brees for the last few seasons. They thought maybe Jameis Winston could be able to fill that void, but it wasn't the case. So now you move to Derek Carr. You feel like you pretty much solidified the quarterback position. It's time for Derek Carr to be able to step up and do just that. Last season, I'm looking at the stats of Derek Carr. He threw for 3,878 yards. He had 25 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. But, you know, you look at these stats and you'll probably say to yourself, well, they don't seem pretty bad. But when you look at it from the grand scheme of things, a lot of these yards came during times where the Saints were just trying to fight back into games. So if the Saints can actually start early and Derek Carr can hit the ground running early, I think that, maybe you'll find more success at that position. And then we go ahead and we look at the backup quarterbacks. We got Jake Haener and we got Spencer Rattler. Two young guys that are fighting to be the backup quarterback. Both of these quarterbacks, to me, are very, very talented. I feel like they have bright futures. So the Saints are in really good hands when it comes to the backup quarterback situation. I think that both guys bring something to the table. Will they be franchise guys? I'm not sure. But I think that, if they were to come in, I think these guys are smart enough to be able to win some games for the New Orleans Saints. Once again, franchise quarterbacks, I do not know, but I do know that these guys have something to bring to the table. Then you move on to the running backs. The Saints have Alvin Kamara, they have Jamal Williams, they have Kendre Miller, and they have Jordan Mims, who they signed in the offseason. So these are your running backs. I think you need to start with Alvin Kamara. Over the last few years, Alvin Kamara hasn't been the Alvin Kamara that a lot of people are used to. And some people may think to themselves that, well, Alvin Kamara is starting to get up there in age, and we know how that goes, right? When you start to get close to 30, all of a sudden people just feel like you don't have it anymore. But I don't think this is the case with Alvin Kamara. I mentioned at the beginning of this episode that the Saints needed to turn the page offensively. I think that what the Saints did, and it was a mistake in my opinion, was them to think that just because you keep Sean Payton's philosophies around, mean you're going to run it just like Sean Payton. I always say, like, if anybody can do what a player does or a coach does, how special is that coach or that player? And I just think that Sean Payton did a really good job at putting Alvin Kamara in positions to succeed. And I just think that when he left, there were members of the coaching staff that did not really know how to utilize Alvin Kamara effectively. A lot of the things that made Alvin Kamara special, I don't feel like the Saints used. But you have Klint Kubiak. He comes in, bringing a wide zone. We know they put a strong emphasis on the running game in wide zone offenses. So maybe this could be one of those things that Alvin needs in order for him to take his game back up once again. Then you have Jamal Williams, who came from the Detroit Lions, and he was the leading rushing touchdown guy in the entire NFL. Last season, he only had one touchdown. I really feel like the New Orleans Saints offensive line may have played a role in that. And also, I just think that maybe the Detroit Lions offensive line was pretty damn good that didn't matter who was the running back. I mean, they were going to score touchdowns or have big games. So maybe that played a role. But all in all, I think that Jamal Williams is a talented running back, more of a one-cut back, maybe fight for some extra yards. I expect him to play a little bit better if the New Orleans Saints offensive line improves. But you definitely need a little bit more from Jamal Williams if this running game is going to be successful. You got Kendre Miller, the rookie out of TCU, who came in last season, was in and out of the lineup due to injury. So hopefully he can be able to, deal with those injuries so he can see the field. And, of course, Jordan Mims, who I mentioned the Saints actually signed in the offseason, he's looking to try to be a part of that rotation. So solid group from the New Orleans Saints. If you are looking at this team, it's probably not going to knock your socks off as far as the running back room, but you got some guys that can get the job done. Probably not going to be the top in the league, but can be effective in games. So be on the lookout for that. Then you move on to the wide receiver room. You got Chris Olave, you got Rashid Shaheed, you got Cedric Wilson, you got A.T. Perry, you got Bud Means, and you got Equimedius St. Brown, the brother of star wide receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown. So these are your wide receivers. The only two guys that really stand out is Chris Olave and Rashid Shaheed. These are the two guys that stand out the most because these are the two wide receivers that the Saints are going to have to rely on if they're going to be successful in the passing game. These are the two guys you're going to be looking at. You got Chris Olave. Last season, he had 1,123 yards. He also brought in 5 touchdowns. So, Chris Olave took major steps from year one to year two. That's what you want, and especially for a guy that you want to be your number one wide receiver. And, I think that he brings a lot to the table. And, I do feel like he needs to be able to work on his yards after the catch. I think that is separating him from being in that upper echelon of wide receivers, being a top 10, but he's on his way. He's polishing his game every single year. And if he can actually add that to his repertoire, I think that he'll be in that conversation. Then you have Rashid Shaheed, the speedy guy that can get behind the defense. I don't feel like the New Orleans Saints really utilized Rashid Shaheed as much as they should have. I don't know what was going on with that, but you can tell this season the Saints want to utilize him. They gave him a contract extension, which pretty much tells me that they want him to be a part of their offense, and he's going to be a part of their future. So this is a really good 1-2 punch for the New Orleans Saints. I think you're honestly wondering to yourself who is going to be that number 3 wide receiver. Is it going to be Cedric Wilson? Is it going to be A.T. Perry? Is it going to be St. Brown? Is it going to be Bud Means, your rookie that you got from Pitt late in the draft? So you're wondering to yourself, who is it going to be? I still feel like you need that big body receiver, kind of like that Michael Thomas, Marcus Colston type receiver that you had in years past. But these two guys, Olave and Shaheed, they're no slouches. And I think they're going to have solid seasons. Then you move on to the tight end room. You got Juwan Johnson, you got Taysom Hill, and you got Foster Moreau. 3 guys that are pretty solid. We know Taysom Hill, we'll start with him. We know he is the Swiss Army knife of the New Orleans Saints. He does so many things. He can throw the ball. He can run the ball. He can catch the ball. He can do everything, right? He can even play special teams. And a few years ago, the Saints decided to, switch out his position from quarterback to tight end. And he's been hitting the ground running, been pretty solid, even though he says he's a tight end, even though the Saints tell us he's a tight end, they didn't really utilize him like a tight end. So I'm just wondering this season, will it be one of those seasons where we actually see what Taysom Hill looks like in a full-time role at being a tight end? And maybe that has to be the case because Juwan Johnson is dealing with an injury, and him being able to be available at the start of the regular season is up in the air. And you also have Foster Moreau, who is a pass-catching tight end, but mostly is a blocker, even though he does have that capability to catch the ball. Maybe this new offensive coordinator, Klint Kubiak, can be able to get Foster Moreau involved in the offense. But it should be interesting to see what the tight ends are going to do. Weren't as effective over the last few years, so maybe implementing these guys into the offense probably would help this team and help Derek Carr when it comes to the middle of the field. And then you move on to the issues that really plague the offense, which is the offensive line. The New Orleans Saints offensive line was ranked 23rd in the National Football League, according to Pro Football Focus in 2023. That's not where you want to be, at the bottom of the league. And this offensive line had a lot of issues. A lot of guys that are trying to figure it out, like Trevor Penning, the former number 1 pick for the New Orleans Saints in the draft a few years ago. He came out of northern Iowa. He was supposed to be the solution to the loss of Teron Armstead, who went to the Miami Dolphins. And he struggled at the left tackle position. I mean, it was a train wreck. It got so bad that the Saints actually had to bench him, and he wasn't even in a lineup. So I think that you're dealing with a confidence issue when it comes to Trevor Penning. When it comes to Trevor Penning, they decided to switch him from the left side to the right side. You look at the right tackle position, there is an opening for that, and somebody going to have to fill that void because that is a huge void. Ryan Ramczyk, the longtime New Orleans Saints player, a former All-Pro, is out for the season, and his career is up in the air due to a knee injury. So you move Trevor Penning over to the right side, and you hope that he can actually build up some confidence and also be able to play that position. So it should be interesting to see if Trevor Penning can actually take that by the horns, or is he going to lose out on that opportunity in competition. And then you look at the first round pick of this year's draft for the Saints, Tella Fuaga. They decided to put him at left tackle. He played right tackle at Oregon State, but it seemed like he kind of have been adapting to that position. And I think that he is a solid guy. I think that he's going to be a talented offensive lineman. At least I hope that the New Orleans Saints have this guy as the future left tackle of this organization, because they definitely need one. Then you have other guys like Nick Saldiveri, Eric McCoy, and Cesar Ruiz. Nick Saldiveri is trying to be that starting guard as of right now. He checks all the boxes. He has really good athleticism. He's a huge guy, and he can move really well. And when you're bringing this wide zone, you need some athletic offensive linemen in order for this offense to be effective. So the New Orleans Saints definitely are trying to change it up a little bit on the offensive line, and they're going to have to if they're going to have any success in 2024 offensively. Then you move on to the defensive side of the football, and you look at some of the guys that have been longtime players here, and in a combination of some guys that came over and going into their second year in 2024 with the Saints. You got Cam Jordan, you got Nathan Shepard, you got Colin Saunders, you got Carl Granderson, you got Chase Young, Brian Brzee. So these are your guys that are probably going to be in your rotation as your front four. You got to add also Peyton Turner to this group. But you start with Cam Jordan. Cam Jordan, the longtime New Orleans Saints defensive end, the all-time leader in sacks, multi-time Pro Bowler, multi-time All-Pro, definitely is a Hall of Fame player, but he is up there in age. He just recently turned 35 years old, and you're wondering to yourself, how long will he be able to do what he's doing? Now, he's been an Iron Man throughout his entire career, never really honestly been hurt, for the exception of last season. He struggled a little bit, and some of the things that has made Cam Jordan special as a player, he was limited and couldn't do. So he only had 2 sacks last season. I'm looking for him to be able to maybe have a little bit of an uptick. But at this stage, you're basically just looking at Cam Jordan to provide a little bit of a spark and some leadership here. And you're expecting some of these young guys, like I mentioned, like Chase Young and Brian Brzee and Carl Granderson, to be able to step up. The New Orleans Saints front four has not really put pressure on the quarterbacks. They have not really been able to put the quarterbacks on the ground. They're ranked at the bottom of the league when it comes to quarterback sacks. So I'm just wondering to myself, just like I mentioned in the Atlanta Falcon video, who is going to be that guy to be able to be that double-digit sack guy? Can you get consistent pressure on the quarterback? It's amazing to me that the Saints defense is ranked so high, and you don't have a constant pass rush. So that's, in my opinion, that's pretty impressive. The fact that you don't have a pass rush consistently, but your defense is still ranked in the top 15. So if you can get some guys that can consistently put pressure on a quarterback, I think that you'll be just fine. But then you move on to the linebackers. You got Pete Werner, you got Demario Davis, you got Willie Gay. So you look at this linebacker group, you bring over Willie Gay, a 2-time Super Bowl champion with the Kansas City Chiefs. He provides some speed at the linebacker position, and also he can be able to cover the tight ends and running backs. He can run. You also have Pete Werner, who is a sure tackler, also is pretty good in coverage. And you also have the leadership in Demario Davis, who, just like Cam Jordan, up there in age, but no signs of slowing down just yet. So you got a really good combination here. You can also have maybe some young guys to be able to come in and be able to provide a little bit of depth there in the rotation. But once again, you know what you have in Demario Davis. You know what you have in Pete Werner for the most part. But I'm looking for the pass rush. You definitely got to get the quarterback on the ground this season if you're going to win some games, because sometimes late in those games, especially the way that the offense is structured and you want to run the football, it might be one of those phone booth games quite often. And you're going to need to be able to get the ball back into the hands of your offense, or you're going to have to put the quarterback on the ground in order for you to seal the win. So looking forward to seeing what the Saints are going to do to improve that defensive line. And I think that the linebackers are extremely talented, so I think they're going to be okay there as long as they stay healthy. Got to put that out there. And then you look at the secondary, which has been the strong point of the defense for the Saints. You got Paulson Adebo, you got Marshawn Lattimore, you got Jordan Howden, you got Tyrann Mathieu, you got Kool-Aid McKinstry, and you also have Alontae Taylor. So this is a very formidable group. I think the Saints have done a really good job at depth with the cornerbacks. I always feel like, the cornerback position, you got to be pretty deep here. You need some cover guys. I think the biggest issue that the New Orleans Saints had in years past is you didn't have guys that can kind of rotate from the inside and the outside. But over the last couple of years, you've been able to actually correct that issue. I think that, when you have a guy that just solely is known for being a slot corner, and then all of a sudden your outside corner gets hurt and you have to slide him to the outside, you find yourself being in a little bit of trouble. But now you have guys like Paulson Adebo, Marshawn Lattimore, and their second-round pick, Kool-Aid McKinstry. You have three guys that can actually play on the outside, and you can rotate them. When it comes to Marshawn Lattimore, we know that he's a shutdown corner, definitely a top 10 corner in my opinion. But he has to correct these injury issues, man. He's been in and out of the lineup. He's missed a little bit of time, but if he can actually correct that, we know what the New Orleans Saints secondary could be. They can do so many different things when he's out there. So hopefully he can be able to play the entire season so the secondary can really be effective. Then you look at Paulson Adebo, who had 4 interceptions last season. A really talented guy, gets better every single year. Not a really big rah-rah guy, just does his job really well. And you could tell like he's starting to get a little bit more comfortable in the defense of the New Orleans Saints. So really good 1-2 punch there. And if you look at Kool-Aid McKinstry, we know what he did at Alabama, a shutdown corner, a guy that the lights aren't too bright for him, coming from Alabama, coming from the SEC. I mean, I think that he's ready for the big stage. I mean, when you have a nickname like Kool-Aid, like, you got to be able to ball, right? And then you look at the other guys like Jordan Howden and Tyrann Mathieu. Jordan Howden going into his second season out of the University of Minnesota. They're looking for him to replace Marcus May. He's a solid safety. Hopefully he can be able to take that next step. And also Tyrann Mathieu, who has about, 7 or 8 interceptions since he joined the New Orleans Saints. Definitely is a leader in that secondary. The Honey Badger still playing at a high level. But I look at this safety position and I'm wondering, like, if something was to happen to Howden or, happen to Tyrann Mathieu, like, who's going to fill in? I mean, you got Ugo Amadi, you got Jonathan Abram, but, when I think about Jonathan Abram, I look at him as a liability in the secondary. He's mostly like that linebacker / safety, right? If he puts his hands on you, you're going down. But I think he kind of struggles in coverage. So I'm just wondering, do the Saints may need to take a look at maybe the depth at safety and maybe adding someone, or are they comfortable? I mean, you got Miller Bradford, who has shown some promise, especially coming out of TCU. But I think that you need a little bit of a veteran presence there. So looking at this defense, I think it's solid. I think that you definitely can take steps forward with a pass rush. Offensively, they definitely have to fix that offensive line if they're going to generate any levels of success. So in 2024, where do I see the New Orleans Saints? Well, in 2024, I definitely can see the New Orleans Saints improving. But it's really, honestly, up to the offensive line and Derek Carr. You paid Derek Carr to come over to solidify the quarterback position. You definitely want him to do that. If he can actually do some of the things that you need him to do, I think that the Saints can indeed be successful. You're also going to need some help from your defensive front four in order for them to generate a pass rush. But I have the New Orleans Saints still in 2024 on the outside looking in of the postseason. I just feel like the New Orleans Saints are not really embracing this rebuild process. I think that they're trying to still try to win now, and I think that they look at themselves as contenders at this point. But I do not see the New Orleans Saints being a contender until they face the obvious. You got to be able to get younger. You're one of the oldest teams in the league. So I just think that if you embrace this soft rebuild, I'm not saying like do a complete overhaul, but you have to be able to address some of these positions because the NFL is getting faster. Guys are more lighter on their feet, and they're more athletic when it comes to the pass rush. And if you don't want to embrace the present, then you're going to find yourself living in the past and missing the postseason. But I would love to hear from you. What do you think about the 2024 New Orleans Saints? Do you think they are a playoff contender? Do you think they'll make the postseason? Do you think they'll have a solid season? Comment down below, like and share this video. Thank you so much for checking out the Gumbo Pot Sports Podcast. Once again, my name is Timothy J. Jones. You can follow me on X at TJAYJones8, and you can check out previous episodes of the Gumbo Pot Sports Podcast by clicking one of these videos right in front of me.